Hello, I'm Steve Ryder and welcome back to Racing Weekly, a podcast and YouTube show brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. I'd just like to start the show, obviously passing on our best wishes to John Hunt and his family. There have been many touching tributes, particularly from Richard since, but as this is our first show back since the unthinkable act, I just want to let John know that he's in our thoughts and we hope to have him back on the show soon. Alongside me today, making his debut, is Jamie Lynch. Jamie, how are you?
Very good, thanks, Steve. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to succeed if you go by Steve than Stephen. So did that factor into your decision early in life?
I mean, it's only really my mum that calls me Stephen.
Yeah.
Or my wife if I'm in trouble,
right.
I suppose. So, yeah, it wasn't a conscious effort,
No.
But it might well go into my thoughts now.
Yeah.
Richard, how are you?
Fine. I'd better call me Richard rather than...
Rich.
No, Rich is fine. The other permutations are probably quite so good. So, not too bad. In the circumstances, as you say, everyone's sombre, but at the same time, it's very important that we don't let such things creep into every walk of life. It's unthinkable, unimaginable, but yeah, we've got plenty of positive things to look at racing-wise, and that's exactly what John would want as well.
Exactly, yeah. We've got a couple of segments, obviously, on the show. First of all, I just want to get your kind of thoughts on Super Saturday that we just had, around 11 races on ITV. Is that too much racing? Could we do anything around it?
I think it's too much good racing. That's my main issue with things. I mean, there's three very high-profile tracks, York, Ascot and Newmarket. And obviously Newmarket were the ones that moved, and I think that still grinds York's gears slightly, so they're reluctant to give up the spot. They probably are the meeting that could move back a week, because when we get to the end of the show, we're going to be talking about the Hackwood and the Super Sprint, which if you look in comparison to last Saturday, would rate 9th or 10th on the list. And that's my concern, is the imbalance. I think you need to give a product that's good consistently rather than everyone get excited and you get feast or famine. So my concern is not that there's too much racing in that regard, but there's too many good races concentrated on one afternoon.
Yeah, especially when on the Sunday we had two jumps cards.
Yeah, some of this still remain. We should have learnt from COVID when we moved things around. You remember the Eclipse was run on a Sunday, and they are potentially quite popular cards. The problem is, whilst the courses own the fixtures, the ability to move them is really restricted, and I do sympathise with the BHA there. If only certain courses would give up, say, 20% of their fixtures. You still own them, Steve, but I can position them. I think we could all make the fixture list work a lot better, and then we get more returns. Crowds would be better as well, but it's just that it's so sticky racing to move anything.
Definitely. And Jamie, this is the time of the year that I really enjoy, the 3-year-olds going against the older horses. Has there been anything really particularly that's caught your eye throughout the season that you're looking for to go on?
Well, in terms of the season as a whole, if you were trying to determine how good it would be or how memorable it would be, you would have said at the end of last year, it depends on what city of Troy does. And we're midway through the year, and it still depends what city of Troy does, because we're sort of in the departure lounge, yet to take off. The flight hasn't been cancelled, but we're just sort of, are we good to go or not? So with him in particular, he is the headline horse, the banner horse, with whom you could still say this could be a star-studded season. And seasons are remembered by horses more than horses making seasons. So what's your view, Richard? Have you looked back at Sandown, at the Eclipse especially, and just have you had any other thoughts on the back of what he did there?
No, not particularly. I sort of said at the time, and I sort of share it, that he was, terrible in the Guineas, good in the Derby, and then we had one in the middle. So I'm not concerned. It makes me think that Newmarket isn't a complete blip, in the sense that he had the chance to build on that Derby success in a race that was set up for him the way they felt it was going to go. I appreciate, they might have done things differently, but he hung and he didn't have that purpose through the line. And from a betting point of view, that makes it extremely difficult to work out what he's worth. I agree with you, Jamie. I just think I won't remember him, even if he went unbeaten out to the end of the season, in the same way that I remember, say, See the Stars, who was completely blemished 3. And then Van Dijk as well, another horse we went into winter quarters thinking could make the season. I think I put him up as my horse to follow on this right at the beginning of the year, and it's been underwhelming. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you ran away from him in the Eclipse, I don't think they'll be running away from him again now. It'll be interesting to see if he takes up his King George engagement in a couple of weeks' time. The first section we'll look at is Racing Recap. So the first race we'll look at is arguably the highlight of the whole weekend, the July Cup. Millstream beating Swing Along by a neck, with Van Dijk proving best of the 3-year-olds back in third. Richard, what was your thought on the race?
I think the surprising thought, and Jamie will probably echo it, it was how the 3-year-olds were eclipsed by the older sprinters. I think most of us have probably felt the lines of forms with Inish Erin, who looked a potentially smart horse, and if not, the returning Van Dijk would prove too good for what had looked a fairly motley bunch, to be fair. I've watched it a few times trying to rationalise it. It was solidly run. It was a good tempo race, which suited Millstream, who's probably got up in the final bounds at York and looks as if 6.5, 7 wouldn't be beyond Millstream. The little group on the stand side, it was odd because they were the best horses, but they just didn't seem to have a sprinter to take them in. They all sort of got outpaced at the same time. River Tiber wasn't quick enough. Inish Erin, who'd looked fast enough before, and Van Dijk, who travelled into the race as if he was going to play a hand, sort of flattened out as well. So I think my abiding thoughts are the 3-year-olds potentially are weaker than I thought, and Swing Along in particular I thought deserved a little bit of upgrade, and maybe Jasur, who was like a lamb on the way to post. I made a point of shouting down saying, he's gone to sleep, because he's normally keen. As soon as the gates opened, he just took control again. He could put it all together in the right way, as he's done a couple of times. So Swing Along and Jasur, positives. Overall, I don't know what you think, Jamie, this remains a division that's a nightmare, doesn't it?
Since the last 2 horses that you could say were true high-class sprinters, Blue Point and Batash, 2019, 2020, when they were flexing the muscles. We have 7 Group 1s over sprint trips in Britain a year. We've had 33 Group 1s since their day, 31 different winners.
And one of them was with Cardham.
One of them was Cardham. The other one was Shaquille, who did a Commonwealth Cup, July Cup. But that just paints a picture of, we've been in this setup for quite some time now. And Millstream was the one who just made the advance that day. Just interesting, going back to the champion sprint last year, you and I are both students of sectionals rather than aficionados, but we're forever trying to find out what does it mean. It's far more sophisticated and complicated than picking out one section. But the fastest horse in last year's champion sprint was Millstream. He ran the fastest furlong of any horse in any furlong. And I remember making a point of that in the review after, saying, I don't quite know what this means, but it tells us that projection, there is something there to work with. And it's just interesting how you can trace back his success on Saturday all the way back to the champion sprint at the end of last year. But the nuts and bolts of the race was, I had a good close examination. The horse who ran the fastest split this year was Van Dijk, between 3 out and 2 out. And it just put in my mind of, put yourself in the shoes of James Doyle. He was expecting, probably, those 2 on his side to take him through the race further. And I think that he maybe even just saw which way the wind was blowing and had to use up Van Dijk at that inopportune stage between the 3 out and the 2 out. So he's one horse who I would certainly think, I can still see him making the jump or the connection point to where he was last year, at least. He is favoured for the Haydock Park Sprint Cup, though, isn't he? So, I mean, it's not saying anything new there.
Physically, he didn't take my eye as much. I don't know. It's sometimes we went down this route with City of Troy, didn't we? So they'll probably start measuring him and stick it on social media if I'm too bad. But in terms of, he looked a bull of a horse at 2, thinking, you'll train on. He didn't quite catch my eye the same way at 3 on Saturday. But the prep has been interrupted. They clearly ran him to try and get him to Ascot when things weren't right in the yard. So yeah, he travelled into the race, the best of those 3-year-olds. It's just, he was beaten by horses, as you say, Jamie, that we've seen a lot of. It's not like someone's really advanced their case going forward. It was nice to see commentators here. Peter Harris's colours, they're not quite the same because his daughter has the yellow cap, but they've been colours, right the way back to Bachelor's Hall, Acarenas and Jumpers in the year. So it was really nice to see him. He's put a lot into racing, both as a trainer, a breeder and everything. So it was quite nice to see those successful, and for Jane Chapel-Hyam as well.
Do you know, of all the horses with all them colours, do you know the horse which sticks in my mind? Stocksfold. Remember Stocksfold?
Yeah,
for some reason,
I had the cap.
No idea, but that horse sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
Very briefly, back to the 3-year-olds in that. I echo your thoughts with Jasur. Just time to bite the bullet now and let him fly over 5, isn't it? Because how he's getting so close at the end of the race is quite staggering, given the energy that he's expending. So he's not in the Nunthorpe. He's in the flying 5 at the Curran. It would suggest to me that, they have to just at one point let him rip and let him use all that speed, even just to get out of his system. And Inish Erin's the other one who, a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? Because we all assumed in the Commonwealth Cup that this is the next big thing, and he hasn't carried it on. We must all hope that he does hit those heights again at some stage, because don't forget that it just struck me at the start of the year, the European Patent Committee told us 3 races that were on the danger list: Temple, the Chester Vase, and the Commonwealth Cup. And it would strike me as knee-jerk to reduce the status of the Commonwealth Cup when it serves such a purpose, not just for the Royal Ascot, but for the entire start of the season. So I would be disappointed if Inish Erin didn't do it again, just fearing about the Commonwealth Cup.
Yeah, William Haggis, who's I think on the Patent Committee, was on a podcast at some stage saying that race, because of its sort of technical value, if you like, of providing stepping stones for 3-year-olds, he would hope would have at least a longer stay of execution. But it is very useful in keeping them apart. And even though everyone's been quite keen to downgrade it, you just mentioned, Jamie, we had Shaquille. We've had other horses move come out of that race and prove that it sort of works. And it's quite nice then, symmetry of clashing of the generations. July Cup's the first time they meet, same time as the Eclipse, same time as the King George. You know, why force them to meet earlier? Because the 3-year-olds historically did struggle, hence the reason the Commonwealth Cup was put in place. So.
And I think the race did suffer this year, obviously, with 3 late non-runners in elite status, Bucanero, Fuerte and Van Dijk. So I don't think this year is really one to kind of judge it on. I'd be with you on just either a hood or a drop to 5 furlongs is definitely what he needs. I'm surprised that they haven't tried a hood yet.
It is, yeah.
It's funny, when he came out to the course, Jim Crowley actually had to shake him up to get him moving, and I'm thinking, blimey, I haven't seen this before. As soon as the gates opened, it was exactly the opposite. Just tore into the bridle. And whether Jim thought that and thought, I'm all right this afternoon, I don't know. Because you're right, you have to drop him 2 lengths off the back, don't you? Otherwise he just races. So.
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah, provided William Buick with a landmark 100th win at the highest level and his first win in the race. And we'll be talking about William Buick in the next couple of races as well. The next one I want to talk about is the Bet365 Superlative Stakes. Ancient Truth remaining unbeaten in his 3 starts, emulated his sire Dubawi winning this race. Jamie, I was there on the Saturday. I was really impressed.
He's really polished and professional, this horse, isn't he? And talking of William Buick there, I think he might be the best I've ever seen at Newmarket, both courses combined. He's had 368 wins at Newmarket. Expected wins based on field size and starting prices, 328. And he just knows the secrets, and he knows what needs to be done at what stages with what horses. And I think this was a perfect case in point, wasn't it, of both when and where he presented him. So as far as he's concerned, Ancient Truth, we look at the 2-year-old picture generally and thinking how he might go forward to the national stakes, are we? And he's on the right path, he's with the right stable, and Charlie Appleby's just got 4 horses entered in the national stakes, of which, of course, he's one and probably the likely one. But he's still behind the big 2 from Royal Ascot, Fairy Godmother, who we're projecting, and, of course, Bedtime Story. And if Bedtime Story is going to go the Moyglare, but Richard, if Bedtime Story and Ancient Truth were in a match bet, she'd be 3 on, wouldn't she?
Yeah, I think she would. I mean, the thing with Bedtime Story is she might have just beaten... She was a bit of an outlier for the Chesham in the sense that she has the speediest dam-side you can possibly have in a race where your sire has to win over 10 furlongs. So it could well be that she just went clear because the others have more traditional stamina pedigrees and she's never going to go beyond a mile, even though she ran in the Chesham. But she won by a wide margin, and as you know, Jamie, with your time form hat on, that enables people to give them a big figure.
Yeah.
Whereas your Fairy Godmother, you adjust, but you're not really quite sure when you've met lots of trouble and you've got up in the flying final strides. Ancient Truth, a bit speedy. When I looked at all of the numbers, he was a bit speedier than I thought. I'd be keeping him around about the 6 at the moment and not going too much further. You know, I was quite surprised that he was quite so... I'm sorry, at 7. The Seagulls 11 stays 7 really well, but I'd be keeping Ancient Truth at 7 rather than the Mile, where Seagulls 11 is related to the Platinum Queens.
Yeah.
So starting off over 7, I put a big question mark, but he stays I like him as well. I think he's the sort of horse that can rock up in a futurity or whatever we're going to call it these days at the end of the season and wouldn't be completely out of place. I like him. He's honest. He puts his head down, but certainly Ancient Truth, 7 furlongs is his go at the moment. I wouldn't see him getting middle distances next year at the moment.
Yeah, the runner-up was a bit up on 2 legs in the parade ring.
Right.
So that could well be upgraded as well. I thought Columnist also took the eye, obviously finished a close 3rd in the Coventry. You'd imagine a drop back to 6 would be right up his street rather than going 7, entered in the Phoenix and the Jim Crack at that trip as well.
Coventry's taking a few knocks, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, all of those, it might be an unusual year in the sense of all of the pattern form up until midsummer is worth less than it normally is. And actually, in the group races going forward, you're looking for those who either bypassed Royal Ascot or more likely, and more interestingly, the once-raced novice and maiden winners. My suspicion is that the early part of the 2-year-old form isn't as strong, isn't as robust as it normally is, and it's no coincidence that Ancient Truth bypassed Royal Ascot and beat all the Royal Ascot form lines that were in there. So I think that might be replicated for the rest of the season.
Yeah, National Stakes, obvious target for the winner.
Yes.
Obviously did it with Quarto and Native Trail.
Native Trail, yeah.
So, yeah, you'd imagine that's
this race has provided the champion 2-year-old, 2 of the last 3 years with Native Trail and City of Troy. So, yeah, it's become a really important race. So did Dave have a runner this year? Did he?
No, he was a non-runner.
No.
There was about 3 came out, wasn't there?
There was, yes.
Which was a bit of a shame. Obviously, he's sent off 4 to 6. But another Ancient who was impressive was in the Bahrain Trophy, Ancient Wisdom. I was disappointed with him, Richard, in the Derby. He was my selection. Maybe the ground was a slight excuse, but he looks all stamina, really. And he's now 10 to 1 with Bet365 for the St Ledger.
Yeah, I mean, the ground does look as important, doesn't it? I mean, he's got that action as well, and more noticeable when he was pulling up. Although subsequent events as we went through the day suggested the ground wasn't quite as bad as we might have thought. So I wouldn't necessarily pigeonhole him as a soft ground performer, but they're going to keep him away from anything that's got good to firm in the title, and that's going to dictate where he goes, possibly even at the leisure if we had a really sort of dry summer from now on. What do I think about it? It never ceases to amaze me how few runners this race gets.
Yeah.
200,000, and we got 4. We've never had more than 6. So the question asking you really is, what did he beat? And hence whether you can, extend that forward to suggest it was a really good performance. On his ground, in a ledger that came up soft, he clearly would be a leading player, but anti-post-wise, you just can't gamble on the ground, I don't think.
No, and you would question the form space legend sweated up beforehand, was
Yeah.
too keen early on in the race, and you do have to question what he's actually beaten.
Fell apart around him, and William knew how to play that race again, playing that field size and playing the horse's own strengths as well. And I think even Charlie Appleby said after that the ground is going to by and large dictate what that horse's rest of the campaign looked like. But he was very forthright in the sense of you give him some soft ground and it's a serious horse. Now, we've had 2 ancients there. Do you want to play a little game of the most regular first name of Godolphin horses in the last 5 years?
Ooh.
I've got 8. I've got the 8 most frequently first named of the Godolphin horse in the last 5 years. Ancient, of course, is one of them.
Ancient's one of them, that's no good. Blue.
Not Blue,
Really?
Dubai.
Hoiles.
not Dubai. I really thought you'd be better at this.
Yes. So
You've
do
got
I.
one more go each before I put you out of your collective misery.
Arabian.
Arabian
Oh,
is
good
well done.
shout.
Arabian is
Say-
one.
Oh. I call them all the time.
You've
I
got-
still can't think.
You've got 7 to go out. You must.
7.
Yeah, you've got.
Come on, out, Steve. You can whisper one in my ear because I'm useless at this. So,
Rebel.
No, I'm going to tell you. Are you ready?
go on.
Naval, noble, notable, modern, magical, mythical, creative, Arabian, and ancient.
Oh, we should have got the Guineas winner, shouldn't we?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Even hearing most of those,
Yeah.
it wasn't as if I felt. Yeah. Do we know why they named them? Is there any?
I don't
know,
think so. No.
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 Sometimes they have little themes, don't they? Every,
Yeah.
Like with Ballydoyle with the old artists and
Yeah.
composers.
Yeah.
You can normally pick a good one, can't you?
I went down the Australian route a little bit as well for a
Yeah.
few of theirs. It's
Yeah, yeah.
It's always nice when people take some time to name.
Yeah. What about Whistle Jacket? Where's that come from?
Well, the most famous painting of all.
Yeah. So what's he a son of? He's a son of.
He's a son of.
Is there any painting connection, basically? Never mind. Don't worry about it. Go down it.
Were you impressed with him in the July Stakes?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I mean, I think that the race he comes out of, Royal Ascot, is the best of them, even though it's traditionally not the best, Norfolk. But he and Asterius were side by side, actually, throughout each other, and they both franked it to a reasonable degree, and I've come on to a form line very much at the end of the show, which features horse in the super sprint, and it's pretty solid. The key point was he was able to do, Jamie was saying sections, everything ran sub 11 seconds from 3 to 2. He was the only one that matched it. He ran consecutive 10.98 second furlongs. And everything else was then well over 11 for the second time. Some of them ran faster than he did in the preceding furlong. They couldn't keep it up. It was sustained. He drifted, in terms of drifted out to the left, not in terms of the market. But I think they've always suggested he was a good horse. He seemed possibly to be sacrificed for other horses as regards trip at Ascot. 5 furlongs and quick round was too fast for him. He'll be a leading player, I think, in the races to come. But Aiden's got a pack he needs to juggle. But I was impressed. I thought it was a good performance, more akin to the reputation we'd had going into Ascot than the horse we saw at Ascot, I think.
Yeah, notably strong in the market again. He was the only horse sent off
Yeah.
odds on at Royal Ascot and was obviously beaten that day. But yeah, I thought this was more his ground and his trip.
It seems the ground is important, doesn't it? Just that little slight bit of ease just helps him express himself that much more compared to Ascot, which was like the road by that stage as well. He's not quite a little big bear, though, is he? His full brother, who was exuberant and extravagant and who could almost tiptoe into the ridiculous at times. I think he's much more functional and much more just together right now. But yeah, I think he'll dance the rest of the dances. You can map out his programme now. But I'd just be slightly surprised if he was sort of in the top 10 juveniles at the end of the year, because I sort of get the impression now that we're seeing him to his maximum. Richard explained the efficiency with which he ran there, and the overall time wasn't that great compared to other races on the card. So there are a few strings attached with him now, which I think can stop short of believing that he's going to be automatically a Group 1 winner of the future.
Yeah, he's 16-1 with Bet365 for the 2,000 guineas next year. But do you see him more of a miler or do you see him more of a sprinter?
I think more of a sprinter.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Richard? I think that his
I'm
speed
not
has been his strength.
Yeah, I think that this race, compared to the 2-year-old race that the Duchess of Cambridge, for example, which was run far more solidly early, speed was his asset on the day. And so as a result, I wouldn't be stepping him up in trip either. I didn't want to step set Ancient Truth up either, and I wouldn't be stepping him up at this point in time. The Morley had been mentioned, I think, and that possibly would be quite a sensible place to go. There aren't that many brilliant French juveniles. You'd likely to get some cut in the ground. You should get it run to suit, but let's see what Aidan wants to do. I'm not quite sure of. Only he knows what he's got bubbling under the horses that we've seen, or how good those maiden winners are that are 4 to 11 actually are, and where they fit in the pecking order.
But you'd be surprised if there wasn't 4 or 5.
I think
better than this.
I think your point at the top is well made in the sense I followed the 2-year-olds a lot this year, and going into Ascot, I thought they weren't as anything special, and they get wiped by the Irish ones. And until the last 2 we've mentioned, Fairy Godmother and Bedtime Story, they weren't. And I was coming to the conclusion that actually the Irish ones possibly weren't that great either. So I hadn't really thought about it, but Jamie's point about those that weren't at Ascot might turn out to be better, or those we haven't seen at that sort of level might turn out to be better, I think is definitely worth considering in the weeks and months to come, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. A few of those back-end maidens, particularly John Gosden, targets later on, doesn't he?
Did you see, just to interrupt briefly, did you see that horse called Chancellor?
Yeah, on the Thursday, it was impressive.
That was at Doncaster.
Yeah.
It's worth seeking out because it's very, very unusual, that horse's process through the race.
Yeah.
He's by Kingman and he's out of Queen's Trust, who won the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf, and that was a wow moment almost when you see that. So John Gosden himself has said that his 3-year-olds for the last few years haven't been what they hoped, but he said, we've got a really good bunch of 2-year-olds this year. And he said it quite pointedly as well. He had a winner, a Newmarket maiden winner.
Yeah,
the
first couple, I think, that he actually won on. And it's no secret that a lot of the Newmarket yards have struggled in terms of just getting some consistency. William Haggis's 2-year-olds compared to last year, where, of course, he had Relief Rally, we'd been talking about in the Super Sprint. None of those, including a few Kodiaks that were bought by the same owners trying to do the same thing, have been completely eclipsed. So, Simon Christopher, very few 2-year-olds so far. They've had one, I think, that won first time out. But, there's going to be a big bunch of horses from those Newmarket yards that we'll be seeing from August onwards, I think.
And the overall point is, when they come to meet the established pattern form from this point forward, I'd normally sway towards the tried and trusted weights and measures horses who've been there and done that with a proven form. This year, I will sway more towards the potential, I think, because I don't think the standard's that high.
No, definitely. Especially in the colts at the minute. I think the 2,000 guineas, I think, is 10 to 1 the field, whereas normally at this stage after a Royal Ascot, you'd have at least one of the colts.
That's a really good dividing line to draw because obviously Fairy Godmother and Bedtime Story, there's one in France as well that sort of speak for themselves. There is actually, you can draw that. That's a point well made, I think.
Yeah. One horse that really surprised me with how impressive he was Giavolotto in the Princess of Wales Stakes. Coped with the drop in trip. I think ground is important to him, but all roads lead to the Irish St Ledger.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get a good ground and he can put it up to Kyprios.
Funny, isn't it, that sort of I spend my time analysing horses, getting to know horses, their requirements, their abilities, and I'm just thinking, what's that thing there when they sauntered upsides at Newmarket? You think, I thought I knew that horse. That's not that Giavoletto I know. But he's found his strides and his straps this year, hasn't he? And just obviously, whenever I see this happen, especially when it's at odds with your original thoughts about a horse, is that you just naturally start to question it, be sceptical. Being cynical about performance is the best thing you can be because it makes you question and scrutinise. And I was just looking at, do you know, Rich, the field sizes where he's won 4, 4, 6, 6, 5, 6. And he might just be one of those who's got really good game when it comes to small field tactical races, and he can just flaunt a bit of speed at the end of it. If he went into more competitive races, can he reproduce that figure he seemed to? Because on the face of it, Steve, that's a huge run to give a rest, a penalty, and a 3 1/4 lengths beaten.
Yeah, the ground probably had dried in his favour as opposed to a rest. So I do think he's a bit like Ancient Wisdom in the sense that I think he very much is a soft ground horse. I think the other issue, because I like Jamie, I mean, naturally cynical in that regard, and you look. Normally, it pays to do what your wife tells you, doesn't it? Following your wife is not a bad strategy, but it was at the weekend because Hamish got completely outmanoeuvred in the wrong group behind 2 outsiders who couldn't take him into the race. Hamish, if you break cover on him, that's not his go. It never has been. Sometimes when he got up late, was it York or Doncaster? I can't remember last year when it looked for the world as if he was beat the whole way. He's not going to close the gap that he effectively. It was a bit like the Tour de France. He was in the wrong group. He couldn't get back. If you take him out and it's faster ground, can you begin to query a rest? But I wouldn't be too hard on Giavolotto because I do think, as Jamie said, under a £3 penalty, it was competent, straightforward. And Marco Bocci's always adamant, hasn't he? We're not going. He doesn't stay beyond 2 miles. Now he's questioning whether 2 miles is too far. And the Irish Leisure is the right race. There's very few other races you can go to. So,
and historically, you'll get a small field there as well, based on what you said, Jamie.
That will be in his favour. In theory, Steve, looking at the numbers, the time form numbers, he'd have been right alongside Kyprios and Trawlerman in a Gold Cup, like not that trip, but certainly that standard. And that is a real testament to where Giavoletto is and the surprising element. But yeah, in theory, he's up there. In practice, we'll have to wait and see. But right now, he's one of the surprise packages of the year.
Yeah. Might be interesting in watching the in-running odds in that Irish St. Nature, because Kyprios, is going to be under the pump, and Giavoletto is probably going to be sat there.
Yeah.
And it could be an in-running play there.
I think if I was at Aden, I'd be having more than one in there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
You wouldn't want that to turn into a sprint at all.
No, you'd want it honestly run over 1 mile and 6, because as you say, Kyprios, he might be the first off the bridle, but he will keep going.
Yeah.
Giavoletto's weapon for a stayer seems to be the ability to tactical speed.
That's it.
Yeah. Tactical speed may well have been the tool that Arabian Dusk won the Bet365 Duchess of Cambridge Stakes. Shed her maiden tag in this Group 2, beat Mountain Breeze by three quarters of a length, Heaven's Gate back in third. All of that fairy godmother form is all working out well, and I was impressed with this. I thought it was good for Harry Davies, a first group success as well.
Yeah, let's start with him, because he was an apprentice who has probably been slightly unfortunate in the sense Billy Loughnan's progress as part of the Eclipse, but he has suffered slightly from the transition and the weight when you become, slightly older, slightly bigger, and you no longer claim, which helps your weight, but doesn't necessarily help the rides you got. And particularly because the Crisfords were using him a lot at the beginning of the year, and that seemed to be his opening. And a bit like Kieran Schumacher with Gosden, it wasn't going well for the yard, and so the ability to ride a big winner was really welcome, I think. As regards the race, I thought they went fast here. I thought, Ryan on Heaven's Gate and Bountiful, I would be happy if they met again at 6 that they could reverse that form. Right. I thought Arabian Dusk, even though Harry was keen to say he didn't hit a flat spot, I thought, she was, I would be happy enough to suggest that 7, I'd be following the first 2 over 7 and the third and fourth over 6. Not sure of the overall depth of the form at the moment, but certainly emphasis more on stamina than it was when we were talking about Whistle Jacket.
Yeah. Mountain Breeze is an interesting one to tie in. I thought she was going to be a superstar after her first 2 runs.
Yeah.
Slightly disappointed at Royal Ascot. Obviously, Charlie Appleby was a bit under a cloud at that point, but I think she probably does mean that you can trust this form.
Yeah, I think she's a good guideline to a lot of these 2-year-old fillies at this stage. As you mentioned, that Albany form and the jigsaw of what does Fairy Godmother really look like underneath all of that trouble that she met. But I think Harry Davies is the right spot here. You mentioned the Crisfords and the importance of the Crisfords to him. He didn't ride a single Crisfords horse at Royal Ascot. They clearly made a decision to say, OK, it's almost take him out the firing line. Yeah. And that's why this win is so important to him. But I thought she was really good. And it was one of those where I was just a bit shoulder shruggy at the time. But when you revisit it, she was drawn in stall 1. She played Heaven's Gate at her own game, went straight to attack her, and those 2 engaged, and she saw her off. And then the stamina and the speed blend really helped. But the Crisfords generally, Carla's Way ran the same debut at Doncaster that this filly did, and this, the home signals and whatever data they've got is clearly so sensitive and so good that they identify that she was a really good one to start her in that race and then to run her in the campaign that they have.
Yeah, nice horse going forward. Last race that we'll touch on in full is the Falmouth Stakes, Porta Fortuna. I mean, she's just so uncomplicated and so likeable, isn't she, Jamie?
She's brilliant. She made me think about the multiple Group 1 winners who have been greater than the sum of their parts, in the sense of the tip of their weapon wouldn't say ability, it would say attitude. Do you know what I mean by that? Yeah, it's not the talent that necessarily has got the multiple Group 1s, it's more their attitude and their straightforward nature. I'll give you my top 3. Go on. Number 3, Gordon Lord Byron. Won 3 Group 1s in 3 different countries in 3 different years. And he was never a great sprinter or 7-furlong horse, but I always thought that his attitude helped him. Number 2, it's a controversial one. It's a Ballydoyle one, this. Would he get it? No.
What sort of trip? What we doing?
Mile and a half.
Mile and a half?
Found?
No, but I found would definitely be on the short list.
Broome?
No, Highland Reel.
Okay. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
Highland Reel won 7 Group 1s. And his official rating was 123. Now, if you're rated 123, that might nick you a Group 1 somewhere, but less over middle distances, not 7 of them. No. But you remember when he used to literally win races with his attitude or a move or just,
Or a Shamey Heffernan masterclass in America.
Well, Ryan Rode found, didn't he, in the Breeders' Cup when Shamey made them all look foolish.
Number 1?
Well, It's very much like Porta Fortuna. It's a mile filly.
How long are we talking?
Century.
It's within the last 10 years. No, not Alpha Centauri. Are you ready for this? All right, I'll give you the clues, then you can tell me if you know her name. She won 6 Group 1s. She was trained in the north of England, and the winning margin for those 6 Group 1s
Lawrence.
were a nose, a short head, a
good
neck,
shout.
3/4,
That's
a head and a
definitely right.
half. Lawrence.
Yeah.
Lawrence. Never more than half a length with those wins, but again, her attitude, wasn't it, was just brilliant. And that's a little bit unfair on Porta Fortuna, because I think what the Falmouth told us was that actually there's a lot of talent swimming around in there, and just to pigeonhole her as uncomplicated and straightforward might do her a disservice. But equally, is she good enough to go against the top boys around her? When you consider that the recent ones, Alpha Centauri, you mentioned, Minding, Inspiral, she's not yet at their level in terms of what she's done so far. So she's brilliant for what she does, and her body of work is amazing. She's almost a perfect racehorse, isn't it, if you just determine it on those factors. But do I think she's a brilliant horse? Not yet.
That's a really interesting summary, because I think around the mile, the 3-year-olds are quite interesting. Both, I think, the Coronation and the Prince of Wales were interesting races. At Ascot, trying to talk the pecking order, the notable speech didn't turn up. But Porta Fortuna, she was the one that was, I don't know, your eye was drawn to all of those that finished in the 1,000 guineas, or the fact that Ramachuel went too soon.
Yeah.
And she sort of just did her thing and finished second. And it was easy to move horses past her and suggest that she was only 4th or 5th best on the day. Whereas in actual fact, she just came and did it again. Ascot did it again. This time on a straight course. Last time it was, and she was entitled to win as she did, but she did. And it was relatively uncomplicated. And I like her a lot. I think maybe the Breeders' Cup towards the end of the year might be her sort of go. Obviously, push button speed, and I'm not sure where you go in the interim.
Matron.
Yeah, I'd probably try and keep her against her own sex. I think the Sussex wouldn't necessarily appeal at this stage too much. I think it's often a hidden class rise, isn't it, Jamie? When you step outside you have to be a very, very good filly, I think, to take on the boys at this stage of your career. You might be able to do it when you're older, or the end of the season of the Breeders, but. Yeah.
I imagine they'll go matron stakes and then probably the Breeders' Cup mile against the boys, because you wouldn't want to stretch her out to a mile and 2, would you? So she's 15-2 with Bet365 for the mile at the Breeders' Cup. I think we're being a bit harsh on her. She's won 6 out of her 10 starts, placed in the other 4, 3 Group 1s. I think she's really likeable.
And I think the other point is by the end of that week, emphasis was more on speed. And her main opponent, I thought at least, was a Lilac Roller, who that's not 10 furlongs for her, I think now, or certainly more of a test of stamina than she had in the Falmouth. She tried to go forward, but Jamie will tell you far better than I will that there's horses, aren't there, that stay further. There was one the other day, there's Bolsterling at Ascot. You try and you think I stay 10 furlongs, so over a mile you try and go quite hard, and all you do is completely burst yourself because you're trying to go too fast and you drop out the back of the TV. So I think a Lilac Roller, they tried to go forward to countenance the fact that Porta Fortuna had more speed, but it just wasn't her spot.
Just on that very thing, we're going cycling back if we can to the St. Leger when we talked about the Bahrain Trophy, but that horse Hand of God put me in mind of a manifestation of stamina, because if you remember when he won the Golden Gates, it was on the back of King's Gambit's failure, and I think that William Buick was at pains to make sure that the same didn't happen. So he asked an awful lot of Hand of God with the surge and then the sustained surge at the end, almost quickening twice. And that used up a lot of stamina. In effect, it's just manifested in a different way. So I just looked at him and thinking he's 14-1 for the St. Leger. He's got a Voltager entry. And he's just the sort of horse who is on the cusp of making that breakthrough. But just an interesting point there, the mechanics of how you use up your energy. Hand of God was asked an awful lot there in the Golden Gates, and the very fact he came through would point to a lot of stamina being in there.
It's natural, isn't it? If you think you run faster, it's like a 800-metre runner versus a 400-metre runner. Run the finish out of them. But of course, if it's too short a trip for you, all you do is take yourself outside your own rhythm and comfort zone, and you can end up getting absolutely smacked. And I certainly thought a Lilac Roller 10 furlongs in the mud somewhere back in Ireland, I wouldn't dismiss her. I think her form lines are perfectly okay. Just wasn't her lineup on the weekend.
Yeah. Jamie, Richard touched on the summer mile at Ascot there. I thought Quddwah was really good, now unbeaten in his 4 starts. Looked as if he was going to cruise up and go away nicely, but probably just kept a bit back for himself at the end.
Yeah, I think the Kingman in him is there, isn't it? Semi-hesitant at the finish. Just one of
Head's
those
a little bit up.
They rarely lay it all out there. But with his first 3 runs, which he won, there was a stage in each of those where it looked like he was going to be beaten. But not so on Saturday, surprisingly. It was testament of a stable that is now, by the way, going along at full cylinders, the Crisfords. They are bombing along the strike rate right back to where it was. But also a horse who was maturing and learning. And it was quite a big ask. 4th different rider in 4 different races for Quddwah, and Callum Shepherd did a really good job of positioning him in the right place at the right time. So it's one of those where he wouldn't watch that and think, well, that's a Group 1 winner in waiting, but just the advancement with each race and the suspicion that there is more in there. Was it needed on the day, or will it be needed in the future? He's interesting, but he's not interesting for the Sussex. I can't see him operating at Goodwood, for example, where obviously it's very hard, you know, to express yourself against those fast milers. If he went to the straight mile, you know, a Marois
that's what
over in France, that would be more interesting. But yeah, I don't know how good he's going to be, but that's sort of the exciting part about Quddwah.
Yeah, definitely. I think Pujat Lamau would be the obvious thing for you. Was there anything else that took your eye? Saturday, Friday? Obviously, we've already highlighted one from Thursday.
Just a quick mention of, we had the Grand Prix de Paris on Saturday in France, where Illinois went over, Tamfana went over, but it was Saucy who won, and Saucy was runner-up to Luc de Vega in the French Derby. Luc de Vega's unfashionable connections. And it was the sort of race where the parameters were really narrow. You had to be in the right position with the right draw, and that naturally just cast some doubt about it. But he went through that race with great poise and purpose, and the fact that Saucy came out and did that suggests that Luc de Vega, perhaps he does indeed deserve to be an ARC favourite. And there was another big one on Sunday in France. Zarigana was a 2-year-old filly who is a granddaughter of Tsar Carver. And I've very rarely seen a horse win like that based purely on instinct. Didn't know how to race, legs all over the place, inefficient, ineffective, and yet more or less won on the bridle. So I think that might be the star 2-year-old filly from France this year, Zarigana. I'd be staggered if she wasn't in the Marcel Boussac field come October.
Yeah, for the Aga Khans, she really took my eye as well. Yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning, obviously we were on the topic of France, Gerald Mousset retiring at the age of 57, some servant, now going to go into the training ranks. I thought I wouldn't give up on Delius about a couple of months ago. I put him up for the ARC at a big price. And I wouldn't give up on him. He was kind of keen at the rear of the field, probably given too much to do in the straight, and the 2 that actually finished ahead of him were a lot more prominent. So we know that's the kind of French trial.
That's right.
Way for it. So he's now drifted that to 20-1 with Bet365
really?
for the ARC, and I wouldn't give up on him for that race.
The French are not bothered if they're beaten in a trial. They see it purely as a means to an end. And the point is, they rode him like he was Ace Impact, and that horse was never Ace Impact. He's much more of a strong galloper. He's much more his father's son. He's a Frankel who just has got a long stride and a lot of stamina bubbling up under there. So I'm with you in thinking that he is. I wouldn't read too much into Saturday and focus more on the progress he'd made and the statements that were made about him, like really high talk. Just on the ARC, very briefly, while you mention it. Just a quick look at the field, and I just thought Continuous was an interesting one at 25-1, because I just threw out that Hardwick form. He was just there to start his season, and that was a messy race, wasn't it? And Ryan wasn't hard on him. Look back at how well he ran in last year's ARC on really, really fast ground against some really fast horses. If he gets a normal ARC, softer ground, emphasis a bit more on stamina, I think he's really interesting for the simple fact of Aiden's going to run City of Troy, August Road and elsewhere by that stage of the season. I get the impression that Continuous had the ARC ring fence for him at the start of the year. So 25s just strike me as a big price for a horse who he could easily put Hardwick behind him very quickly. Yeah,
and horses previously, I don't think have a great record from the Ledger going to the ARC. I think it's quite a quick turnaround, isn't it? So you could probably upgrade actually what he performed in the ARC.
And I've got a great stat as well. 15 ARC winners were beaten in the race the previous year. So it is a race where you get great learnings from and move forward. Sotsas was the last one,
Founder as well, who we touched on earlier.
Founder's another one,
Richard, anything else that took your eye? Probably Newmarket?
Yeah, just a few random things. The first one actually wasn't a Newmarket. It was Stardust and Democracy Dilemma. Democracy Dilemma is becoming a very speedy horse, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sustaining it a little bit more. I'm not sure whether he holds an entry in the King George sprint version at Goodwood or not, but downhill. I mean, if they can get the blind off right, and he was only nailed late. He was nailed late, but he's shown fantastic speed in the dash, and he really is one of those where 5 furlongs in sprinter. He wouldn't be good enough for a Nunthorpe, but he might be good enough to find a decent 5 furlong contest. Stardust took a while to get to him. He did fold at the end, but that was one thought. Desert Flower impressed me, the opening maiden winner on Saturday. I thought it was very functional for a horse on debut. I know it was Charlie Apple and they're quite well prepared, but he went through the race well. Time wasn't quite as good as you might have liked to have seen, but minimum of fuss. Ears pricked, just looked as if he hadn't really got anywhere near the bottom of him. So that was one. And the Bunbury Cup was quite strongly run. It's easy to get drawn to those closers that meet trouble in those circumstances. We all love the eye catchers. Actually, I thought Lethal Levi ran really, really well up front to only get nailed late by Alto, who was clearly best on the day. Maybe something like the Portland, splitting the 6 and 7, because you're always a little bit vulnerable over 7, or one of those big Ascot handicaps over 7. But he ran surprisingly well. When I look back, he's the only one in the firing line early who's there at the finish, and your eye gets drawn to Yorkshire and was it Carry the One or whatever the other thing was called of Michael Bell's.
Yeah.
They meet trouble and you think, but then they're always in that position, aren't they? They went hard in that race. I would be looking at the leaders rather than anything else. And the other point we've already mentioned, Jamie did as well, Field of Gold winner of the Gosdens.
Yeah, really impressive.
I quite like that form line he comes out of, but just the signs that the Gosden 2-year-olds, you can begin to get a validation of their worth in the next month, I think, beginning to move forward with them.
You might be encouraged to hear Democracy Dilemma does have an entry for the King George.
It's the sort of one he could get away with, isn't it? Because it's not the most obvious port of call for some.
And it's 33 to 1 with Bet365, which is a big price.
Yeah, I didn't see. I don't see anywhere else you'd go. I was trying to think of fast 5 furlong races, but you're going to be too high in the weights now for a handicap attempt. I would have thought. There's worse bets because that race could conceivably. Well, it's an open division, as we just said. And we know from the King's Charles III stand that race was won by the Australian horse, and regional, which we'll come on to for second. They're not great, the 5 furlong horses, are they?
I always take a step back from that because I never know whether it's an S or an F first in Afsura or Asfura.
Yeah, I think
Is
it's
it?
Asfura, I think, but yeah, it's a good shout.
For some reason, my mouth wants to go Afsura.
There's plenty like that. We're calling them that native trail.
Do you know what race Democracy Dilemma might get away with? Is an Abbey. If he's drawing an Abbey, against that 100%. Rail, because sometimes they don't come back and you
just
get
a slight worry that you want it to be ground-wise, wouldn't you? It's, whatever's on speed, I think that. But I would say 33s. If that's genuine, I can see that field being 9 or 10.
Yeah. I'd give Starless a chance in the Nunthorpe. Obviously ran 2 really good races at York. And if they were to sacrifice their own Democracy Dilemma as a bit of a pacemaker that, in theory, he kind of turned into in this race, he's 7 to 1 with Bet365 for the Nunthorpe. And as we keep going on, the sprint division doesn't look that strong. The only other one that really took my eye was Fairbanks in the Bet365 Trophy at Newmarket. He was so keen to post in first-time blinkers, was then keen during the race. And I couldn't believe his finishing effort in that race. The switch from a visor to blinkers kind of landed the gamble. I couldn't believe he went off 15 to 8, and I'd back door in the race. And throughout the whole race, I thought, he's going to come back, and he just never did.
No, you're 100% right. It's one of those where, in terms of achievement, you rate it 9 out of 10. In terms of likability, you probably rate it about 2, in the sense that you're thinking...
Did everything wrong.
But it's a bit like Quddwah, because we mentioned Quddwah in passing. It is that head carriage, isn't it? Yeah. That head carriage is pretty ugly.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a great deal of the horse, and I watched it back and thought, you hang in the latch a bit when you've gone to the front, etc. But then, as you said, Jamie, I went back to watch a couple, and the horse had dug in to win.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's one of those, you forgive those foibles, but when they're there, I do require them to be overcome rather than just ignore them.
Yeah. If they're a big price, you can ignore them.
Yeah, exactly.
If the shorter the price, the more you have to be aware of them and probably accepting of them.
Yeah, I mean, the Ebor will be a logical place. I think he's 12 to 1 with Bet365 now for that. Right. That would kind of be my logical step in my head if I was race manager of the yard.
Is he a 3-year-old? Sorry.
He wouldn't be qualified to run if he is. So if he's in the list, you can't. Because these days they can't run it. They can only run in the Melrose.
Yeah. Well, no, the 3-year-old can't even run in an Ebor. Can't it? No, I didn't even know that.
No, you get a free ticket to next year. But when they when they change the conditions.
Yeah, of course.
It's 4-year-olds and upwards.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why the Melroses are winning you in for the following year. That's why it's a bit of late because you're already enjoying yourself down under by the time you get.
Yeah, definitely.
By the time you get back to the 4-year-old. But yeah, they change the conditions when they change that. Very few of them used to get in anyway because
that's right.
Always meant that they were, even if they were rated high, the weight for age stopped them. But yeah, the days of having one of those 3-year-olds lurking at the bottom, and the Ebor at least has gone. But so I presume he must be qualified, otherwise he wouldn't be in the list.
Yeah, exactly. Right, we've got through a lot of racing there in our section of Racing Recap. Before we get into our weekend preview, just to let you know that our sponsor Bet365 have a best odds guaranteed offer. It's available on every single UK and Irish race from 8 AM on the day of the race. If you take a price and the SP is bigger, Bet365 will pay you at the bigger odds. Full terms and conditions can be found on the website. Right, we'll then get into the action upcoming this weekend. We won't have confirmations for the Irish Oaks until Tuesday afternoon. Obviously, time of recording is currently 11:30 on the Tuesday, but we have a good idea of what's going to run. Richard, I imagine the Ribblesdale winner, Port Fairy, will be heading the market. You've then got Willie Mullins trained, Lope de Lilas in a second favourite, obviously a recent purchase for Wathnan Racing as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are guessing, and the issue for me is that looking at those at the front of the market, I instinctively wanted to take them on, which means that I do want to see what the sort of darker horses underneath that I haven't really looked at yet, who they are when everything comes out. It's worth throwing, I think, Port Fairy, was it a 79 rated horse she beat in the Ribblesdale, I think.
Yeah,
who looked like
Lava,
winning.
Lava Stream.
Yeah, who looked like winning at about a furlong. Now, okay, they can improve, etc., but that doesn't pin it as being form that looked rock solid. Lope de Lilas is interesting, and I probably need to go and do a little bit more work on her. Jamie, you might be further advanced, but
the answer is no. There's nothing in the time, there's nothing in the form that suggests that she's up to this.
It could just be fantastic sale
Yeah.
in the sense you sold to Wathnan Racing, having been, coming from a Willie Mullins background, I don't know. And Edgebuyer, I wasn't 100% sure would stay. There's plenty in
The
her
Dam's
pedigree,
an Australian
isn't there?
sprinter, and she Group 1 sprinter.
Group 1 sprinter over 6, and so and a Frankel, so she was in any way buzzy, and it was the win at Salisbury was very impressive, but they went no pace. So if you like them at 10, it wasn't even a test at 10. So basically, they're the three that I'd looked at, and I'd got question mark, cross really. So I wouldn't be with the front of the market. It's the best way I can describe it at the moment. I'm not sure what I would be with, but it wouldn't be one of those three, I don't think.
No, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Wathnan Racing purchased all those horses to run at Royal Ascot, and Willie Mullins go, no, we're not running, we're going to the Irish Oaks. Yeah. But the form of that race that she won isn't anything. I think the runner-up's beaten in 6 races. Yeah. They're into 88 or something.
I promise you, Steve, I took a jeweler's eyepiece to that form, and I looked at who it beat, how it beat them, times, sectional times, comparison times. There's nothing that says that she should belong anywhere leave this company, which automatically means she's probably going to go and win. But it feels like the right race for a bet, doesn't it? As Richard said, I shared a lot of those sentiments about just the wariness about the top Port Fairy, just a bit whiffy, that Ribblesdale form, and the first-time visor as well that day. Edgebuyer, is she too speedy to stay a testing mile and a half? And then the maiden winner. We don't know Aidan O'Brien's plans, but Content has to be really interesting here. Yeah. It's the bedtime storyline that she's out with Mecca's Angel. She's the same cross as that. But every time you see her, she finishes a race so strongly, including when third in that Pretty Polly. Now, for a 3-year-old to run well in the Pretty Polly, that takes some doing, especially against Blue Stocking and Emily Upjohn. I mean, they're 2 heavy hitters, aren't they? The only 3-year-olds who've won a Pretty Polly in the last 10 years are Minding and Iridessa, who both won multiple Group 1s after. And she was closing in on them at the finish, really strongly as well. So Content, she was 3/4 length behind Porta Fortuna in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly last year. And the first few runs were either getting up to speed or finding out what she wants. But the more we see her, the more she looks like a Galileo who's now ready for a mile and a half. And I think it's a bit of a no-brainer her, but you have to hope that she's part of Aidan's plans.
Yeah, before the betting went down, obviously for this stage, she was a double-figure price. She was 10-1 at that stage. I thought, and a form line actually ties in well with her, was Dare to Dream.
The Gavin Hernan one in France.
Yeah. She bids to become the first French-trained winner since Chiquita in 2013.
Could have when Chiquita ran through the hedge.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, absolutely mad. Absolute madness. And then ended up being trained by Aidan O'Brien, didn't she? But she was beaten 2.5 lengths in the French Oaks. It's worth going back and watching that because she didn't get the clearest of runs. On breeding, this step up to a mile and a half should suit. And yeah.
It was a messy French Oaks, but there were some good horses in there, wasn't there? The second's one since. Tamfana ran really well in the Grand Prix de Paris before it. Stamina ran dry. But yeah, I definitely looked at that one. She is interested, isn't she? Yeah. And trained by an Irishman, Gavin Hernan's gone over there. Yeah. And he's always loved this filly. she's really well bred, and he's campaigned her like a really good filly. But she ran really well in the French Oaks.
Yeah, and she did come over as a 2-year-old and ran
That's
finished
right,
third
yeah,
behind
that's
Content and Kitty
Yeah,
Rose. So the form of that's worked out well as well. And she's around.
That's it. It's just come to me. She's related to Dane
So
Dream.
she's 7-1. So yeah, I thought she was quite interesting.
I was trying to make a case for War Chimes after the third in the Oaks, thinking that, but I don't know.
My gut feel was and it's a real shame because we're not going to see the winner again. Was
Yeah.
that
Ezelaia,
yeah, it was that it was pretty shallow.
Yeah,
she was the
I thought
one out of the
yeah.
race that you're thinking, okay, you could be good, but I'm not convinced about the rest. And fair play to David Minicia, who was adamant that the horse would stay, but it was quite a remote third, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that seems like quite a tricky puzzle, but we're looking at taking on the top of the market. We'll go to an easier race then, Richard, and I'll come to you for the super sprint. Only 25 entries,
Yeah,
and maximum field of 25.
Yeah, this is good. It's good for me because they all go all over the shop. It's not a race that has a lot of pattern to it, you know, in terms of the sense we've had 100-to-1 winners in small groups of 3 or 4 over on the far side. That horse of Richard Hannon's linked something, you know. You do get the fairy tale winners like the Johnny Portman thing that costs next to nothing, or a Rod Millman horse. But you also get, a bit like the 2-year-old trophy, some that are just too good.
Yeah.
And, you know, wipe the floor with them. Tiggy Wiggy would be a really good example of that. Steaming through the field, Monsieur Chevalier was another. As soon as you lock eyes on them with a furlong to go, you think, oh, thank heavens for that.
I know you.
That's going to win by 5, and the rest of it is just a bun fight for the places. And then you get others like last year, I think there was 10 across the course. And it's Relief Rally actually went quite easy last year, but, you know, in terms of it can go up the way down to the wire as it did 2 years ago. So I'm quite keen, though, that the 2 against the field be Cardi, because I think she's solid. She comes from Carl Burke's yard. She's well-rounded. She's had lots of runs without giving up the penalties that would lead you to rise in the weights. That narrow defeat in France in Listed Company possibly was really good, like it was for Relief Rally getting beat in Royal Ascot last year because she avoided the penalty we should have carried. And I think It Ain't Two, who's right towards the bottom of the weights. Her 2 lines of form recently are 4th to Celandine and 2nd to Asterius. I think both of those are pretty solid. We've talked about Asterius and Whistle Jacket and the lines that go with that. She wasn't any match for him in the Dragon, really, or the National, whichever one it was. But she was clearly second best. She's not very big. This is going to be her go. And 4th to Celandine, he ran really well in the Robert Papin the other day and has improved substantially since his first runs, or her first runs. And I'd go with It Ain't Two. My worry about Ain't Nobody is the fact he turned up at Newmarket.
Yeah.
You know, and that race at, I don't know what you think, Jamie Ascot, that race at that he won at Ascot, the American horse did a fantastic job with a little group of just towing them along at a pace that the others just weren't able to go or weren't asked to go. And I thought it effectively turned into a 6-horse race, really, but she turned out to be the best.
It does bring us to that Vingegaard, doesn't it, of Archie
Yes, it was the other side, wasn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
who was in that race.
Yes.
Very much like Eddie's boy before he won this race. He was placed in that as well. And for him to show up so well for so long in that group, on just his second start, Vingegaard probably, this was penciled in for him immediately after that.
Yeah, you got a nice line there, Steve. You got on the wrong wheel, Vingegaard. Couldn't find anyone to tow him up for the stage win. He got stuck out in the middle and the rest of them had already gone, so, yeah.
Vingegaard, 6-1 currently with Bet365. It Ain't Two is 7-2. Ain't Nobody currently favourite at 11-4.
What price is a Mistress for
6-1.
Bell? Right, because that was second to It Ain't Two at Newmarket, and she was really good when she won her maiden at Lingfield. It was a nothing race, but it struck me she was a real racer. And then she got no run in the Queen Mary. Yeah. She was hampered throughout the penultimate furlong and actually came home quite nicely. But she strikes me as one who has the right profile for a race like this. Just as a longer shot, or one that's not immediately obvious, is a horse called Mythical Composer for Clive Cox. Just because it's a half-brother to Tis Marvellous. It's by Sergei Prokofiev, and the first 2 runs were right off. Yeah. 6 furlongs in heavy ground, but then I went to Bath on fast ground and absolutely danced in. And it just could be that you can't say that form will win him this race at the weights, but there was an audible click there of that horse working things out, and obviously Clive Cox is a master at progressing these 2-year-olds.
Yeah, strange enough, he was quite quiet early on, Clive, but the horses are actually running really well, and I think he had a winner at Windsor last night with a horse that looked as if it was marking time. Looked like an early type of 2-year-old, and eventually ended up winning, I think it was a nursery, wasn't it? Yeah. Not the ideal, not the normal profile. So, yeah, I can see that. Those interlocking lines are formed outside Ain't Nobody. If Ain't Nobody wins, I'm going to be wrong. Yeah. You know, But if it is going to win, let's hope it wins by 5.
Yeah. The first thing I always do in this race is look to see what Richard Hannon trains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because between
Followed
himself
by
and
Rob
his
Millman, isn't it?
yeah,
Exactly,
between him and his dad, the stable have won 11 out of the last 32 renewals. So for a 25 runner 2-year-old race, that's not a bad strike rate. Now he has 3 entered at this stage. You can write 2 of them off. Perfect Ruby has 2 duck eggs, has only beaten 3 home in her 2 starts. The coffeepod.co, which I always want to have .com at the end, is only rated 71, so she'll struggle. The other one in this is Miss Colada. So if you then go back, she's really interesting. She's rated 80, which means that she's probably only got about £10 to find on ratings, obviously, for this. She finished a good third behind Mountain Breeze at Newmarket, which obviously form is working out well. Won a Wolverhampton Maiden by 3 3/4 lengths, which takes some doing in any sort of race, and then defied a penalty to win a novice race at Salisbury.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue on the basis of that a mark of 80 is actually quite lenient. So obviously ratings kind of don't mean anything in this race, do they? But yeah, I thought 16-1 was quite big for a filly that's experienced and for a stable that will definitely be targeting the race.
Sometimes just back the stable, don't you, rather back the horse in the sense of you know that they probably know more than we do what it takes to win these races and what the right horse is. But yeah, exactly. I did notice talking about stables that Carl Berker's got a newcomer in there. And obviously with Holloway Boy winning the Cheshire first time out and with him having 2 Royal Ascot winners and with him doing unusual things, unorthodox things with 2-year-olds, it wouldn't surprise me entirely, even though it's almost unimaginable that a 2-year-old can win that race first time out. But Carl doesn't do ordinary things with his 2-year-olds.
No, the only thing I would say is it costs you quite a bit to get to this stage, more than you think, in terms of entry fees. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
If you've come this far, you
might as well go.
Well, I don't know, as you say, you know, in the helter-skelter of that race, it's hard to imagine that you don't know the experience. But you know, there have been horses that have had 1 or 2 runs right down the field that have run really well in it, right out the blue. But yeah, it's a race I'm always glad to be on the way home from. Yeah.
Well, we've mentioned 7 or 8, so we might have to win between us.
We've got a chance there. We've got a chance.
Last race we'll preview in full is the Hackwood Stakes. I think this is a really good race. 13 entries, including regional, who was obviously a late non-runner in that July Cup. Last year's winner, Comanche Falls, in there as well. Elite Status was the one that really took my eye. I was blown away by his reappearance and obviously was an unfortunate non-runner in the Commonwealth Cup when he knocked a joint. But have you got an idea of...
Yeah, I'd be strong on regional, personally. Yeah. I think it was a good run at over 5. I think at that stage, I think they intended to run in both. The only question mark, I live literally around the corner from Newbury, 5 or 6 miles away. We had quite a bit of rain, but the forecast is good for They took him out of the July Cup on the ground,
I thought
which was a bit weird. Particularly the way it unfolded, I think you'd have thought you had a real chance. But if you look at the win at Haydock, the backland, if you look at the horses that are behind there, they're all the horses we've been talking about as winning those, you know, our list of 7. The Swing Along's in there, Cardam's in there. You know, they're all the horses that we've been talking about. And I think at this level, if he ran up against Elite Status, both of them might be punching above their weight for that grade. But I think regional ran really well, even in Ireland, where it was set up for Mitbahi, you know, who doesn't done much for the form, but Mitbahi came off a strong pace, and regional was right there. I think he's a very tough horse. I think he's a bit underrated, and I'd be more than happy to side with him.
Yeah, currently 5-2 at Bet365.
And obviously the point, sorry to interrupt, there's a 3-year-old in there, isn't it, that represents the Commonwealth Cup form.
It's Hand of Blue, isn't it, for Fanshawe?
Yeah, and there's a one of
Lake
as well, Lake Forest as well. Yeah, you know, so as a result, if we're going to learn anything from the sprint, I'd be now much happier with the older horses, not with the 3-year-olds.
I mentioned Hand of Blue first because he was really eye-catching.
Yeah, he's
inexperienced in the Commonwealth Cup. And I think for him, the Hackwood is the logical next point. He's a bit unlucky to be meeting horses like regional and elite status in a race like this because it's a bit after the Lord Mayor's show and they are realigning their targets. But it's not the question that one or both of them could run a higher figure than the July Cup winner because that's the sort of scene that we've got. But I'd be more with elite status than regionals just over this trip. He was deadly. He was so deadly on his reappearance over this course and distance, and he lowered the track record as well. A bit of a funny day, obviously, audience. Lethal Levi then lowered the track record that he broke, so there was something a bit whiffy with the ground there. But the National Stakes hung heavy around his neck all of last year, didn't it? Because we all went, what is this, when he won the National Stakes? And he never quite hit those heights. But with the winter behind him, and he looked $1 million as well, and it seemed to come so easily to him.
Yeah, he was going to be my selection in the race, I thought 3-1 was quite generous, albeit that there are slight question marks, obviously, around that 3-year-old form against the older horses.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought I wanted to take him on initially off the back of Sandown because I thought the pace had collapsed, and I was quite happy for the majority of the season, but he looked a little bit less one-dimensional last time.
Yeah.
One thing's for sure, that in terms of tempo, Regional, who grinds, will not want them to set it up for elite status. So looking at the components of the field, which we can't do yet at the moment. But I genuinely think Regional is a better quality sprinter than people have given him credit for. I think there's more depth to that Haydock Sprint Cup win. And I'm happy at this level. Doesn't carry the penalty, I don't think. Well, I wanted to check the weights, so I do need to check that. Because it's usually at the end of the year. But I'm comfortable Regional will go well.
Yeah. Jamie, is there anything else? We're going to come to our bets in a moment, but is there anything else that took your eye over the weekend entries-wise?
Just at Newbury, again, we're sort of shuffling the pack, seeing what we're going to get. But in that Steventon Stakes, Owen Burrows had a double at Ascot, and he said that Al Yanabi would go there. Sort of press the reset button, down in class, up in trip. But will going up in trip help him? I remember that horse can be fiery, he can be keen, and I think it's easier said than done in terms of getting to relax in what might be a small field over 1.25 miles. And I'd actually rather have the horse coming down in trip than going up, because Macduff started the season really well at Sandown in that classic trial. There was a faint whiff of Westover coming off him back then, wasn't it? Now, he ran in the Derby, in the King Edward VII since, and he just blew his mind a bit in the King Edward VII. But actually, he was still right there 2 furlongs out in the King Edward VII when he raced Feely and then Calandagan came past him. But I like the idea of him over this trip, sort of with all that over the system in an easier race. So just one of those where Macduff versus Al Yanabi, one going up, one coming down in trip. I'd rather be with Macduff coming down. Yeah,
Macduff, 7-1 with Bet365. Al Yanabi, the 9-4 favourite. It appears on jockey bookings so far on the BHA site that Jim Crowley rides Al Yanabi over Al Arsi, who obviously won the race last year. So, yeah, it'd be interesting.
I'd rather ride Al Yanabi than Al Arsi, wouldn't you?
Definitely.
Although not for 9/10 of the race. For 9/10 of the race, I'd rather go to Al Arsi.
It's really funny, isn't it? Because one of the great things about commentary boxes is sometimes they give you a really, really good view of a finish. And I don't mean that just in terms of seeing it, but just seeing. And when Al Arsi got beaten was Pile Driver, wasn't it, I think, in the Coronation Cup? You actually saw sort of there was something left red and beating on the floor, which was Al Arsi's heart as he emptied. And even the suggestion of it, I got mountains of stick. And of course, no one ever comes back on and says, well, actually, you might have been right about him. There was one time that really, you just saw him visibly give up. And he's really high, because he's really talented. I mean, really talented horse, and they're great. They're sort of enigmas. And when he's won, he's gone on and done it. You're always thinking, I love the Archibalds, that scenario, isn't it? But
it was as if it clicked last year when they dropped him back to 10 furlongs, because he'd always looked not a suspect stayer, but the attitude in his finish over 1.5 miles was questioned. And then I think he won 2 over 10 furlongs. And we all thought, here we go. And then he did it again.
That's right. It's, but they are the characters.
The greatest trick the weak finisher ever pulled was trying to make you believe he's not a weak finisher. He did that a few times last year. The curse is that believing you can beat the curse, but you can't. Al Arsi,
then it is what those characters really make racing, because you look at the race thinking, I know you're talented enough to win. In fact, when he did win one of those two, he beat something I fancied. It was Grey Horse of Godolphins, I think. They didn't ride him forward.
Oh, yeah, I know which one.
Might be another Highland one.
Highland Avenue.
And
the one out of Lumiere.
Highland was sixth most frequent.
So we got plenty to choose from. But William didn't ride him forward. And I'm thinking for Godolphin, go forward because you'll break his heart. Go forward to break his heart. He didn't. He got out and sprinted by Al Arsi out. Thinking, that's just an absolute nightmare, because he's done you a horse that you've the other way around so many times. So, they're good characters on that.
The only thing is, did anyone else fall for Israr and the Wolferton? Stood there with your arms folded saying, what's this? Watch him not find, do you?
Yeah, exactly right.
Stretch clear by that 5.
To win it easily. It's when they've got the ability, they've got the innate ability. It's only up to them whether they're going to choose it or not.
I fell for that.
There's not much to add, really. Summer Plate, as Jamie and I had a chat at the front, this occurs out of context for us, really, because we're all talking Ascots and we're all talking Newmarkets. You look at the race, and it's a bit like the old cross country used to be at Cheltenham. In the old cross country, they run round and round and round and round in circles, and the one that JP's back used to win. This is they run round and round for a long time, and the one that Peter Bowen backed is the one I want to back. And Peter Bowen and Sean Bowen, there's a little bit of a joust going on for the early supremacy in the Jockeys and Trainers National Hunt Market. The only reason I know that is I was looking at something for Newton Abbott yesterday. It's 31.30, I think, for Harry and Sean. I think the Skeltons are driven by trying to get 300 grand ahead of the Mullins before we get to the big part of the season. But Sean's suddenly beginning to catch light, and this is where Peter traditionally can really help him. And so forget just for the summer plate, just generally start watching Sean going far and wide. Elliott horses at Perth. This is his opportunity in the next 2 months to try and get the sort of lead that he had last year when his brother was out and it was easy for him to get rides. But this is where I think the Bowens will push, and historically it is their time of year anyway. So a general point rather than a specific one, I think.
Wonderful. Before we get into our best bets of the weekend, just to let you know of a free-to-play 6 horses challenge. It's available every weekend with prize pools available for 5 and 4 correct predictions, as well as a jackpot for all 6. Terms and conditions apply. Jamie, as it's your debut, I'm going to come to you for your best bet of the weekend, please.
Right, Steve, I'm going to go for Newbury in the Steventon Stakes. Macduff coming down in trip. I think it's what he wants now. He was better than the Bear result in both the Derby at Epsom and the Ascot Derby at the Royal Meeting. And I think that this is going to be his day to really shine.
Wonderful. Currently available at 7-1 with Bet365. Richard, your best bet?
I'm going to go for regional in the Hackwood Stakes. I think something we should have learnt from the sprinters over the weekend is that Commonwealth Cup form might be questionable. And at the moment, they take a fair share of the market. Looking at the forecast, the ground is due to dry. It's only good to soft in places I'm speaking, so hopefully that won't count against regional, who would like it to be at least good. Elite status is the danger, but I think if regional, that sprint cup form from Haydock last year has been significantly undervalued, with several good sprinters who franked the form behind, and regional at this level can win the Hackwood.
Currently available at 5-2. I'm going to take a chance on a horse at a big price. He's also in the Steventon Stakes. I'm going to be taking you on, and that's Mandoob.
Oh, wow. Brian Meehan?
Yeah.
Right.
So if you go back and look, his form's strong, but you can just ignore all of his previous back class and actually just look at his run at Royal Ascot in the Duke of Edinburgh Handicap. Like, he was returning from 714 days off the track there. And he showed such a willing attitude at the finish. He led off the bend, and the horses that were at the front, he actually beat. It looked as if he was going to get swamped at one stage, but fought on really strongly. He ended up finishing 4th, but he was only beaten by closers. Crystal Black, Epic Poet and Ziggy were all in the rear that day, and then Ethical Diamond, who finished alongside him, was a bit keen in the early stages. That was off 103, so as long as he doesn't bounce off 29 days off the track, he's at 20-1 standout with Bet365. And I thought, drop back 2 furlongs to 10 furlongs. Yeah. I thought that would suit him well. So, yeah, for me, at 20-1, Mandoob in the Steventon Stakes.
Brian Meehan had the best strike rate of any trader at Royal Ascot.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Not a yard I've ever been able to get right, really.
You had JRB at one stage, I think.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, we liked him once, yes.
Yeah.
What, when he won in the return, in the field?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but then, of course, as tends to happen, the form lines aren't consistent, you know.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. Many thanks to both Jamie and Richard for joining me on the show this week. Richard will be back in the hosting chair next week to preview the King George card at Ascot in the company of Graham Cunningham. Thank you very much.